Hi everyone, and welcome to Data Society's speaker series. This is our third time doing this, and today we have with us Steve Flinter. If this is your first Data Society event, we are Ireland's first student data society, and our goal is to bridge the gap between industry and academia by providing students with opportunities to gain experience outside what they do in their courses and their classes. So maybe to start off, Steve, do you wanna introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So hi Ahmed, Sam, and hi everyone on the stream. Thanks very much for joining. So my name is Steve Flinter, as Ahmed said. I head up. I work in Mastercard Labs, based in Dublin. I head up a team focused on using artificial intelligence and machine learning technology to try and develop the next range of products and services for Mastercard. And maybe if I could, I'll give you a little bit of background of Mastercard here in Ireland and kind of what we do. So I guess everybody knows Mastercard as the kind of the brand of hopefully card you have in your pocket, your debit card or your credit card. But actually, Mastercard, has a lot more products and services than just the card products that people are familiar with. And part of what we do in labs is all around innovating, kind of thinking through what those next range of products and services will be as we work with, banks, retailers, consumers to try and kind of innovate around the whole area of payments. Mastercard in Dublin has been established for a little bit more than 10 years. I've been part of the Mastercard organization in Dublin for about 6 of those. But we actually now have a pretty large presence. We've 500 plus people, mostly in the technology space around kind of software engineering plus product development and all the ancillary services around that. And it's also the global home of Mastercard Labs. So Mastercard Labs is headquartered and run globally out of Dublin, which is a great coup for the country. So hopefully that's a good intro. But if you want any more detail, I'm happy to give you that.
That was great, Steve. I did not know that the headquarters for the world is in Dublin for Mastercard Labs. Steve, maybe to start off with a bit about education and maybe people who are still considering what to specialize in. A lot of universities are starting to offer a bachelor in artificial intelligence, which is something I find hard to believe. I do computer science, and I just can't see how they can go directly into AI from first year of college. So maybe do you want to expand on, do you think that these courses are just more for branding, or can you actually now, maybe with secondary schools introducing computer science fundamentals, maybe you can actually have a bachelor in artificial intelligence?
Okay, straight in with the controversial stuff. Yeah, getting me to to have a pop at the education sector. I'm not familiar with the specifics of how those courses are constructed, but my own background educationally is, I did a computer science, computer applications undergraduate, and then studied artificial intelligence for my PhD. So I went through the kind of route that you talked about. I would always see AI as being a kind of a natural subfield within artificial intelligence, but it brings in kind of ancillary areas like data science, like statistics, and so on. And so I would imagine that these courses are blending a lot of those aspects. I certainly don't think you can get away from having to have a good understanding of software engineering and computer science as part of an overall AI education. But I'm guessing these courses are looking at what are the other areas that may not be traditionally considered part of a computer science curriculum, like heavy stats, some mathematical methods that might be a good fit for an AI specialism. So I think that's one way of looking at it, and I think as well universities generally are looking at what are the needs of industry, where are the next generation of careers coming from, and where do we need to adjust our curriculum to focus on some of those things. So I'm guessing it's a response to that piece as well.
Thank you for that, Steve. Sam, do you want to go ahead to the next question there?
Sure. So, Steve, it seems maybe it's been a while since you've done research in academia, but how would you describe or how would you contrast doing research in industry versus doing it in Trinity or another academic institution?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what you find with a lot of industry related problems is that in many cases they're not bounded by the cutting edge research. In other words, a lot of the problems that you come across in a commercial setting or an industrial setting can be solved by already established techniques. And so a lot of the kind of approach you have to take is more around, understanding requirements, understanding the problem that you're trying to solve, and then figure out which of the techniques that are available to you might be a good fit for that. The point where you get to like the outer edges of the kind of the state of the art, which is kind of where you tend to operate all the time in a university setting, tends to be relatively rare in my experience. And sometimes you do get there, but very often it's around taking what's well known, what's well established, and then figuring out how you can apply that in practice. And usually a lot of the problems tend to be more practical than kind of cutting edge research, if you like. So that's been kind of my experience for a lot of the types of work that I've done and my team's done.
It's great, yeah. And then I guess is funding a big obstacle when it comes to research, particularly maybe in a more academic setting? Do you think funding might be impacted by COVID now?
Yeah, I mean, you would probably need to get somebody from some of the funding agencies if you're thinking from an academic perspective. But funding is always a challenge at a certain level. As I'm guessing you're referring back to, part of my career was with Science Foundation Ireland, so I certainly have a background in academic and third level research funding, albeit that's a few years out of date now. So I won't speak to how they operate now, but certainly from my experience then, it's a challenge in the sense that there are always more good ideas than there is money to go around, almost no matter how much money you have. So there's always another project that you have to say no to, not because it's not of good quality or the people aren't very smart, but there just isn't enough money to go around. And so there's always that sort of competitive tension. That to a certain extent is a good thing as well, because it forces everybody to get better and improve the quality of their work and so on. So it hopefully drives excellence, and that's part of what any kind of research funding system needs to do, whether it's academic or corporate, is to kind of force projects to compete for finite resources and drive funding towards the most impactful things. I would imagine now that a lot of the funding agencies, both here in Ireland or globally, are certainly looking at how do we address the current COVID situation, and how do you direct money to the most impactful things, and certainly the pharma companies, as we all know, are developing vaccines and therapeutics and all that kind of stuff, and equally in our field we see people like Barry O'Sullivan, Barry Smith in UCD publishing stuff in the analysis of what's going on, and to circle back to our world. The research that's happening on the data science and AI side is feeding into our understanding of what's going on with the pandemic, and that's helping hopefully to raise the overall level of knowledge as to how the current situation is being impacted by research, both on the pharma side as well as on the data science side.
That's a great answer, Steve. Thank you. Maybe we should actually link a few of the work that Barry Smith and the other researchers are working on for our members to have a look at, because I've read some of it and it's quite interesting. Moving to a more recent part of your career in Mastercard. I guess this is a very general question, but again, something that is always misunderstood or people aren't sure what exactly it is what's the role of data science in fintechs or in a company like Mastercard? Like, what if I graduate as a data scientist next year? What would I do in Mastercard?
Sure. Yeah. Potentially a lot of things. So the obvious one that everyone probably jumps to initially is a big part of what we do from a data science point of view is around protecting people in various ways. So we have a whole suite of products aimed at security, and that could be things like identifying and reducing and preventing fraud on the card network generally. We have a whole bunch of products focused on identification of the individual through things like biometrics, through things like facial ID, voice ID, and so on. Some of those we've developed in-house, some of them we've acquired, but there's a very kind of large suite of products focused on security generally, and most of those products have AI, machine learning, data science as one of their kind of foundational kind of components. So that's kind of one obvious piece. Maybe less obvious is other things that we use data science for, is around things like, we have additional products and services that we offer to banks, for example, around the whole area of rewards and loyalty programs and that kind of stuff. So we can use data to help inform how we can run these loyalty programs better. So to ensure that we give better offers to the right consumers, the right cardholders, drive value for the merchants, the retailers that they work with. So there's a lot of data science involved in that area. And then kind of maybe more kind of left of field through labs and through my team and indeed others, we're looking at other things that are maybe less obvious. So for example, we did a project last year and into the early part of this year using computer vision as the kind of the core technology set that we were looking at. And you might immediately think, well, what would Mastercard be interested in computer vision for? But there's actually potentially lots of applications for computer vision in our industry. The one that I was involved in was building computer vision models that can recognize products that are sold over the counter. And the use case here was in emerging markets where not every product has a barcode. Small shopkeepers are often locked out of the digital economy because they can't digitize their businesses. And part of that is being able to recognize electronically what products are being sold. So by being able to train a computer vision model, we could recognize the products by their visual appearance rather than by barcodes, hence capture details about the product. And we were able to then compress all of that into a mobile app that the shopkeeper could run on a consumer grade Android handset in the shop. So there's just a kind of a few examples of different uses of data science around the organization, but many more. And I guess part of as you think and as your kind of society thinks about future careers in any company, whether it's Mastercard or any others, what you probably find is there's lots of use cases that may not appear obvious from your perspective as you look on their website or look at their products and services. The data is being used right throughout these organizations for different things and for different purposes and use cases.
And you kind of touched on it a bit there when you mentioned the applications of computer vision, but what are the sorts of technologies that you would traditionally use at Mastercard?
From a data science point of view, you'll find a lot of things that I'm sure you guys are familiar with. We use a lot of Python type packages, so TensorFlow, scikit-learn, all of the things I'm sure you're learning about at the moment. Different teams will use R and other both proprietary and open source technologies. And then I guess we're in the process as an organization of moving different parts of our business at different stages to cloud platforms. That poses a whole bunch of challenges as we do that. Data governance being a key part of it, and security, etc., related to going to the cloud. But as we do that, that opens up a whole new world of things that we can do in cloud-based technology that is maybe a little bit more difficult to implement in kind of homegrown stuff. But I'm sure all of the things that you guys are learning about, like, as I said, TensorFlow, Spark, all of these things are kind of well and extensively used internally within Mastercard.
Thanks, Steve. Something that we obviously don't know, but it'll be nice to discuss is, where do you see the impact of technology in the financial industry going in the future? Is something like blockchain under your radar at Mastercard? And like, what's your personal opinion on where we're headed with regards to technology in finance?
Yeah, so I mean, on blockchain specifically, yeah, it's definitely a very keen interest to Mastercard. I guess in some people's minds, blockchain is conflated with Bitcoin, and we have certainly tried to pull those two things apart: blockchain as an enabling technology versus Bitcoin as a currency. But our view is blockchain is certainly a unique and very interesting technology. We're building, and we've built our own proprietary blockchain solution. We are building a number of use cases on top of that, including things like supply chain and the provenance of goods, which we think is a really interesting development in this space that'll be enabled by blockchain. We're also looking at the whole area of national digital currencies. So as banks think about issuing, fiat currency through blockchain technology, we're looking at that as well, and are working with a number of national central banks around that area. So definitely blockchain, is a really, really hot area within Mastercard, and one that we're investing very heavily in. And maybe to broaden out your question around kind of technology in fintech generally, we've seen a huge growth in the whole fintech space over the last 5 to 10 years, and a lot of that has been driven by the fact that as consumers now, we all have mobile phones in our pockets, and just as we've seen online shopping move to mobile shopping, we've seen things like Uber and these kind of mobility services move to mobile, or even be kind of born on mobile. Again, I think we're seeing the same sort of trend in the fintech space, where consumers want to have all of the services available at the touch of a button. They don't want to go in many cases into a bank. And so this is kind of, given that traditional banks sometimes struggle to innovate in these areas, it's given fintech players opportunities to do what startups do, to be nimble, to innovate quickly, to go after the consumers, and particularly the more tech savvy and kind of mobile consumers, like I suspect many people in your own society. So it's driven the whole space forward hugely, and has forced, I guess, the traditional banks now to try and catch up, to innovate, to ensure they don't get left behind as the fintech players come and try and compete for the same customer base that they would always have had.
Yeah, that's kind of covers my next question, which was just on the sort of, a lot of the kind of publicized innovation would often come from the startup scene. The really big innovations you hear of would be Revolut and all the other up and coming fintechs. So it's interesting to consider kind of teams like your own, which are essentially the sort of existing companies' response to the startup scene and trying to drive their own innovation. And so I think that's really interesting. What would you kind of say would be your kind of main few projects that you work on at Mastercard? What do you think might be the most revolutionary thing coming up and coming?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I could just kind of comment on your first point. I guess one of the things that Mastercard does is it works with lots of different customers in lots of different markets with lots of different demographics, and so we work with the fintech players. Indeed, we have our own startup program called StartPath, focused very much on working with these fintechs, either the ones who are going direct to consumer or the ones who want to sell into the traditional banking partners. And equally, we're very interested in working with our more traditional partners to help them get the technologies, the tools, the know-how that they need to innovate. So it certainly, from a Mastercard perspective, we want to make the technology available to everybody and raise the bar for the whole industry, so that ultimately, and this is really what it's all about, the end consumer gets served better. And whether you bank with a traditional bank that's been around for 100 years or 200 years, or you're banking with Revolut or any of the Starling Bank or any of the startups that are out there, that you get that great experience while you have a kind of a safe and secure environment to do it in. So we want to make sure that our technologies and products and processes, etc., can be available for the whole market. In terms of what excites me most about what we're doing, labs in general, I think you touch on one, which is blockchain. There's a ton of really interesting things going on in that space that we're involved in. In terms of what my team is involved in, I think we're looking at I think trying to affect a change to a lot of existing Mastercard products and services by raising their capabilities, by injecting AI and ML type technologies into them. So on the one hand, some of the projects we do are kind of very net new, like the computer vision one I mentioned, where that was a very much a startup type idea. But in other cases, we're trying to take AI and inject it into products that may already have a market presence, and hence increase the value or increase the capabilities of some of those products. So it's hard to pick winners in some cases, or it's hard to pick favorites, because in different ways they're all equally exciting. But really, part of what we're involved in is taking a company that has been an innovator and trying to continue that journey to push AI into more and more corners, to use AI to drive more product development. So ultimately, that's the thing that kind of keeps me awake, keeps me interested in the role and the team.
And I'll just come back to a question I had earlier, which was just, you were nominated and a finalist in the 2019 AI Awards. Is that right?
Not just nominated, we won that, but yeah.
We won that. Oh, great.
That was for that computer vision project that I referenced. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant! So that was directly related to the computer vision project you did.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the reasons that we won was, or one of the features of the project maybe that appealed to the judges was, there's some very, very interesting and difficult to solve computer vision problems in there. Not the least of which is, how do you take a computer vision model, which if you've studied that in your coursework so far, you'll know that these tend to be fairly heavyweight models. They're trained on kind of clusters of GPUs. To take that model at the end of the process and then shrink it down, quantize it essentially, and get it to run on a mobile phone with sufficient resolution and sufficient performance that it can essentially recognize images in real time or close to real time. So there's there was a ton of technical challenges around that. We also even had to kind of solve problems around the data capture, which is in many kind of data science projects is sometimes the hardest work. In the case of that particular project, we were training our model. There was no off-the-shelf data set that we used, so we had to have a small kind of field force on the ground in Kenya, in Nairobi, which is where we ran the initial prototypes. And they were going around kind of shop to shop, buying individual items that we needed to train the model. They would take it back to our lab in Nairobi. We had built a kind of a rig to scan all of the images, so to take kind of 3D video imagery of the products, and that was used as our training set. So we had lots of kind of technical challenges on the data side, on the training side, but also it's a sort of in that case, it fits very well in with the general Mastercard kind of doing well by doing good. And financial inclusion is a big part of the corporate ethos within Mastercard, and how do we build products and services that don't just serve the wealthy of the world, but also the underserved of the world. And that project was very much in that direction. It was all about, how can we build a solution that would work for merchants, for small retailers, in some cases micro-sized retailers, that are often excluded from the digital economy because they don't have the technology, which means they can't get digital records of their businesses, which in turn means they can't get bank accounts and get credit histories and all those kinds of things. So all of this technology layers into being ultimately able to serve our customer, the shopkeeper in this case, and hopefully help them to build their business, get their business on a really sound kind of digital footprint, and help them then kind of interact with the traditional financial world.
Thank you, Steve. That's actually one of the most exciting projects I've heard about in a very long time, especially as someone who loves to be involved in startups. And I just fear the day that I get so sucked into my job that this dies out. So I'm glad that these kind of initiatives are there at big corporations such as Mastercard. Will we take any questions now, or will we wait? Sam, what do you think? Sam, I think you're muted there.
Sorry, do you want to take that question there, Ekman?
Yeah, so a question here from Fikri is, where do you see conventional bank branches 5 or 10 years from now?
Yeah, I mean the bank branch is definitely under huge pressure. I mean, there's no question about that, and we've seen nearly every bank around the world close down bank branches or rationalize the bank branches. So will they still be around in 5 to 10 years? I suspect they will still be there, but I suspect there'll be fewer and fewer of them. But I think more likely what we're going to see is banks changing the types of products and services that they offer through branches. So if you've been into a bank branch recently, and I think the last time I was in a bank branch was around about Christmas of last year, so it's probably a year ago. But what you see from a bank branch now is it's not kind of just rows of tellers, doing kind of very transactional things. It's much more around advisory services. So what banks are trying to do, I think, and this is where we'll see the world going, is all of the simple to do things will be done through chatbots or online or mobile apps or whatever. But then as you look for more complex things, if you want advice on, how do you manage your finances, if you want some professional guidance that may be better coming from a kind of an expert in the area, they're the kinds of things I think banks will try and focus through their branches. How do they become high touch, high value places to do business? And then all of the more transactional things will move online. So that's kind of where I think it's moving and will continue to move in the next 5 to 10 years.
That's brilliant. And we have another question here from Z. I think essentially he's asking, do you think that in general data science has not enough of a foundation in solid mathematics? Do you think there's too much computer science, essentially not enough math? So I think that was his question.
Well, I suppose it depends on the individual practitioner. I definitely put a lot of stock in people with mathematical backgrounds, and what I would give advice to anyone who's kind of embarking on a career is to try and get the balance of that right. I think having a strong maths and stats background is very important. But if you don't know the computer science, if you don't know the software engineering, then you're challenged in terms of, you might be able to build a great model, but you may not be able to translate that into something that can be put into production. A Jupyter notebook is not a production ready output. And so part of what I always look for in my team and in terms of some of the outputs that we build is how do we take that model and then turn it into a software artifact. So I think the ideal candidate for any job in this area will have some balance of both. So I do think maths and stats are super important, but getting that balance right, I think, is important as well.
Thanks for your answer, Steve. I think we'll go back to our questions now. So I guess you've touched on this, but you were leading Mastercard's startup engagement activity called Start Path Partners Program, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was my first job. I'm no longer in that team. It was kind of my previous role, but yeah, I certainly was involved in that process for a few years. Yeah.
So I assume you came across many startups during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us about how was that, and maybe a few of the most exciting startups you came across?
Yeah, I mean, it's and Sam gave us the question earlier around the whole kind of fintech space. So Mastercard got into this area and decided to put real effort behind the fintech scene and the startup scene about 5 or 6 years ago. And my initial role within Mastercard was to get that activity started in Europe. I think it is really important for a company like Mastercard to recognize that not all innovation comes from within. And it can be very tempting for large companies to think we have all the best and the brightest minds. We don't need to kind of look outside our own four walls. And I think there was a recognition when the Start Path program was set up that a lot of innovation is happening in the startup scene, and we need to be part of that. And part of it is we need to feed into it. We need to, kind of partner with these companies. We can also use the reach we have into the banks of the world to help these startups to connect with our customers. And in so doing, we provide value to the startup. We also provide value to our customers because we can help them to identify useful and interesting startup companies. So, it was a very, very positive ecosystem kind of play. And I found it, was a hugely, hugely interesting time in the industry generally. Yeah, as you guys know, I'm sure the startup scene is hugely energetic. And so it's always great to work with founders, many of whom have come from traditional backgrounds, corporate backgrounds, banking backgrounds, have given it all up, have really gone after the startup dream, and kind of working with people like that is always super exciting and really inspirational. So I absolutely loved working in that area. Some of the companies that we worked with, you mentioned one already, Revolut actually came through that program and was my first introduction to Revolut before I really knew them as a consumer brand. Who are the other kind of cool companies that we've worked with? I spent a lot of time working with a startup out of Sweden called Divido, who are in the installment payment space. And there's been a lot of kind of buzz around that area recently. So the whole kind of concept of how do I buy now and pay later? And, the credit card is one mechanism you can do that. Taking out a term loan is another. But there's a whole bunch of fintechs kind of reimagining other ways to do that. And Klarna, you may be aware of, Divido have another solution. So I did a bunch of work in that space, and they were a fantastic team and a very exciting team. So, I could kind of go back through my emails and my notes from that period. There were definitely tons of interesting companies around the world, a bunch of really cool AI focused ones and data science focused ones as well. That I worked with. So kind of maybe too many to mention, but there were a couple that come immediately to mind.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think you started your own company nearly 20 years ago. Is that right?
I've had various stabs at the startup world myself through various channels, and it's a real passion of mine, that the whole scene. But one of the things that I learned from that process is it's very, very difficult. And I guess when I was in that when I was kind of going through the startup process, I had two companies, I guess, that I started at various times. One was a consulting type business, which went well, as well as it went. I was there with a number of co-founders, and at some point we decided to go our separate ways, and the business, we kind of, I guess, folded the business in a structured way. I had another startup which was more very early stages, kind of a tech focused one, and again it didn't really work out for me on that occasion. But I learned a ton from both of those efforts, not the least of which was it is difficult, and it gave me, as I said, a huge admiration I have for founders that go through that, and also gave me a realization that it's a great thing to do when you're early in your career. It becomes much more challenging as you get later, because inevitably in life you take on commitments, family, all this kind of stuff, and these things do become a bit more challenging as you move on in your career. So getting that balance right between having the experience to do it and the expertise versus kind of career stage is always a challenging one. But as I said, I've nothing but admiration for people who can do it and who manage to really succeed in the startup space.
I totally agree. It's a very tough balance to find. So I have a question which actually Eva also asked. So do you want to put up that question? Yeah. So basically, what are you looking for maybe? Do you want to give some advice to students or anyone who wants to work at Mastercard?
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer to this will be similar to what to a question that we had a few minutes ago, which was, to me, I think getting that balance right between the data science part of a job and the software engineering part of a job, I think is really interesting, and it's where the sweet spot is for somebody who can really add value to a business. So if we think of the kind of the data science piece, we typically think of people who are good at taking data, perhaps data that's already been prepared, applying their modeling techniques to it, and coming up with a nicely trained model. But that's only really part of the overall problem that we have to solve when we're going at a real world problem. So what you find in practice is the data engineering piece can be a real challenge. Very often we're working with data that was never really designed with a machine learning or AI application in mind. So there's a lot of feature engineering, data cleansing, trial and error, etc., and even practical things like in the Mastercard sense. A lot of the data we're running on is, the record sizes are measured in the billions and in the hundreds of gigabytes. So very, very large data sets. So you have to run those on clusters. And so you're kind of time sharing these big clusters. So there's a lot of considerations around that stuff. And that's all kind of on the input. Then you can do your modeling. And then on the output side, as I mentioned, a Jupyter notebook is not really a production grade output. So it's fantastic for R&D, for trial and error, for doing our experiments, trials. But at the end of the day, that needs then to be packaged in some way so that it can be productionalized. And so you need to generally wrap some software around that. You may need to expose your model via APIs. You need to have a CI/CD pipeline to be able to push that into production. So somebody who has that broad range of skills that can work from the data right through production and do various steps along that way, I think is super valuable. And they're the kinds of people that I tend to look for when I'm kind of building up my team.
So we have another question here from Fekri, I think, who is asking, maybe are the ethics in data in fintech, maybe is data privacy second to innovation, do you think, sometimes, or is that a main priority?
Certainly from a Mastercard perspective, we have been pretty vocal on that. We have published kind of a number of data principles and data guidelines that we want to be held accountable to. So you can certainly Google that, and if I can find a link for you, and you can share with the audience after the fact maybe. But Mastercard has certainly set its stall out as wanting to be very ethical around the use of data, and essentially taking the principle that as the cardholder, as the consumer, it's your data. You should be in control of it, and it should be used for your benefit. And I mentioned how we kind of work in the loyalty and reward space as part of our product offerings. And one of the ways you can think about that is that if you're getting a set of offers or loyalty program rewards that are driven by Mastercard data, you should feel that they're of value to you. It's an opt-in type thing, and you should feel that for the receipt of this email, I'm getting some value for that and for the information that's being shared around it. So that's kind of the Mastercard approach typically. I don't want to comment on the industry generally because different companies will have different principles, and there's a lot of stuff in the media around how different, particularly the large corporates in the tech space, use data. So it's very difficult to generalize, but certainly from Mastercard's perspective, we have tried to take this very principled approach and been very kind of vocal and public about it.
Thank you, Steve. We have a question from Chloe as well, who enjoyed the computer vision project. She is asking, who do you think is the upcoming fintech players in Ireland and Europe?
Okay, well, firstly, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was a great project, and we hope to continue to evolve and develop it. The fintech players in Ireland and Europe, it's a difficult question for me to answer, to be honest, because I'm a little bit out of that scene at the moment. It's not an area that I've focused on. In terms of the consumer brands that you're familiar with, again, we've mentioned Revolut, Starling Bank, Monzo. There's a whole bunch of these kind of startup banking players that are all kind of vying for share of wallet, both here in Ireland and in the UK and mainland Europe. So how that whole thing will shape out, it's difficult to know, but that's kind of an interesting scene to follow. And then there's a bunch of kind of fintech players who are developing supporting technology, but are maybe less well known, and they're doing things in, we're speaking to people in the whole kind of, say, encryption area, homomorphic encryption, these kind of areas, privacy supporting, and preserving technology. There's some interesting stuff there. Trying to think of other ones that I'm familiar with. Yeah, I mean, it's probably one I would need to take away and think about a little bit, just because it's not an area that I've been as closely linked to as I might have been a few years ago. But definitely a really, really exciting area, both in the consumer-facing ones and I think in the tech players that are providing some of the underpinning technology, both to Mastercard and to the industry more broadly.
Thanks, Steve. Just a few questions that I always think the answers to are always interesting and worth hearing. What do you enjoy most about your career? So, like, what keeps you going on a Monday morning when we have to actually be the cold and go to the office? What keeps you going?
Yeah, the going to the office bit is a luxury now. It's not the chore that it was, but I think. The opportunity to bring new things into the world, as engineers, regardless of what our, particular disciplines are, as engineers, we have that opportunity to take an idea and make something out of it. And that something might be a piece of software that does something, but we, as a discipline, as an industry, are the ones who can turn ideas into reality. And that, to me, in all of the different jobs I've had as a programmer in the early days of my career, even as a research funder, now as a kind of data science leader or AI leader within labs, they all have that kind of flavor to it. It's around being able to take something that only exists in our heads and build something practical and useful and hopefully valuable out of it. To me, that's the kind of the interesting part of our jobs. And anything that I've done has had some flavor of that to it. And being able to say that at the end of a project, I helped to bring that to life, or my team helped to bring that to life. And sometimes it works and it delivers real commercial value and somebody gets some real benefit. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's a kind of it goes with the job as well. But really, that's the motivator to me is that kind of ideas to invention and being able to create along the way.
And I guess this is a funny enough question. If someone hit the reset button tomorrow and you were back in college and you were looking to start a data science career, what do you think the things would be that you would focus on? Where might you go to start that career?
I think for me personally, the thing I would probably focus more on than I did at the time, which is again maybe down to the structure of my my own degree. I studied in DCU, computer applications there, and certainly at the time, and it alludes maybe to an earlier question. The background that we were given in maths and stats was relatively lightweight and was much more focused on the computer science and software engineering aspects. And I do think in the intervening period that maths and stats have become much more important and much more prominent, certainly in the whole data science area. So to me, that would be an area that I would focus on more. Back to an earlier self. Aside from that, though, I'm not sure I would do very much different. I've enjoyed all of the different jobs that I've done, and the thing that you often find with a career is the what you learn in college is a great starting point, but it's only a starting point to your career. And as your career grows, you get experience in things that you could never learn in college. How to work with people, how to work with teams, how to get projects done. All that stuff is very difficult to learn in college. And you kind of, it's experience more than kind of academic learning. And so you kind of pick that up as you go through your career. And equally, the technologies that you learn in an undergraduate world are going to evolve constantly. So the stuff that you're learning today, may well be obsolete in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, and you'll have had to retool. So a big part of what you need to do as you start your career and as you go through your education is go in with that mindset that you're not stuck in a single tech set or a single way of working for an entire career, and you need to go in with that kind of mindset that you're going to evolve, you're going to learn constantly on the job once you've left university, and you'll kind of learn from your place of work. You'll learn what's of interest to you, where you might have less interest, and how to kind of hopefully steer your career in areas that are interesting and valuable at the same time.
Thanks, Steve. I think there's a related question there in the chat. Oshin is asking if, based on your experience looking back now, would you do maybe academia, startups, and private sector in a different order?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to answer those kind of questions. I think in part because where you land in your career at any given time is a function of all of the stuff that's gone before that. So I certainly feel very privileged to be in the job that I'm in the organization I'm in, working with the team that I'm at. So if I did all these things differently, I'd end up in a very different place, I'm sure. And so from that perspective, I'm the attitude I always take with these kinds of things is, everything that you do leads up to where you are now. And if you're happy with where you are now, then, even the good and the bad things that I've done have all contributed to your current situation. But maybe the one tweak I'll put on that is back to an earlier discussion we had around the startup scene. For anyone interested in startups and thinking of going down that as a route, I think it's great to get some actual practical real world experience first. I think it's very difficult to do a startup straight out of university. Some people do, but it's very, very difficult because you lack that experience. But then if you leave it too late, you'll have taken on all of the obligations of life, and it becomes very difficult to step away from that. So if you are interested in the startup scene and the startup world and creating your own thing, the timing of that, I think, it can be very nuanced, and trying to do it, I would say, if I was to go back and do one thing differently, it would be maybe, get into the startup world in my mid to late 20s, maybe, after having enough experience to do it, but before all of the kind of the heavy commitments of life come in. So to me, that's one I might do differently. But like I said, I'm very, very happy and privileged with my current role. So everything I've done up to now, the good things, the bad things, the successes and the failures, all lead up to that.
Thanks, Steve. There's a final question from myself. It's about an interview I read for you. You were saying that careers and jobs don't progress linearly at all. And to be honest, looking around me, I think a lot of people, the way they're thinking right now is, I get 600 points in the leaving cert, I go to UCD, and I get a job, and I progress linearly from there. And there's, like I would say, a sense of entitlement to this progression. I would say, do you have anything in particular maybe you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it already, and it's this idea that, look, careers and industry is evolving all the time, and the thing that you went to study in will even have changed between the time you did your leaving cert and the time you graduate, or if you go in and do a postgrad or a postdoc. The industry is changing all the time. So the thing that you always need to do, I think, is to have that mindset that you have to adapt and change as the environment changes, and equally as your own interests will change. There are very few people who want to be in the same job anymore from the time they leave college to the time they retire. You go through different career cycles, you try different things. You want to work in different companies, have different experiences. Sometimes you want to work abroad. So having that mindset that you're constantly learning, you're constantly growing. As I said, various stages of your career may not work out. You may end up in a dead end. You might have to back out of that and do something different, and that's just part of life. And I think the other thing I would comment on as well is, for people who are kind of doing their leaving cert, and even in college thinking about careers, when you do your leaving cert and you apply for engineering or data science or computer science, whatever it might be, you're doing it without really having any experience as to what the job is like on a day-to-day basis and what the career is like, and would you actually enjoy it. And it's the same if you want to be a doctor or a teacher or a nurse or anything else. We only have these impressions of what the jobs are like, and sometimes they fulfill our dreams, or other times we find actually it's not really what I'm interested in. And I think the same is true as when you're an undergraduate and you're preparing to go into the workforce, that your perception of what a career or role is like can sometimes be very different from what it actually is. And some people realize actually work is a lot more interesting and exciting than college ever was, and they get really switched on by it. Other people find the opposite and need to change careers. So again, having that mindset of being open to and prepared for change and adaptation as you go through your career, I think is what I've tried to live by, and certainly what I'd advise anyone starting out in a career.
Thank you, Steve. I think we can wrap up. If anyone has any questions, do you want to quickly pop them into the chat there? Sam, are you fine with wrapping up there?
Yeah, I think we can wrap up there. I just want to say a big thank you, Steve, for coming on. Really appreciate you giving up your Tuesday evening. It's great having you on. It was really, really interesting. So yeah, like Ahmed said, if there's any other last minute questions, just pop them in there. Guys, if you're interested in watching some more of our talks, make sure to sign up to DataSoc on datasoc.co and follow our YouTube channel for notifications. So yeah, thanks a lot, Steve. Really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been a great chat. Really enjoyed it, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you found it useful.
Right, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot, guys.